My mother announced at my sister's wedding that I was giving her my house by the ocean. She did not mean some small family keepsake or a sweet symbolic gesture. She meant a real house worth almost $2 million. She said it from the stage, in front of 200 guests, while waiters carried trays of champagne through the room. At that same moment, my father was already walking toward me with a folder of documents, as if everything had already been decided. And my sister stood there in her white dress, smiling like I had personally promised to destroy my life for her beautiful beginning. My name is Claire Montgomery. I am 39 years old, and until that evening, I thought I had already learned how to survive around my own family. I knew how to stay quiet through their little comments, how to swallow insults at holiday dinners, and how to pretend my mother's jokes did not cut deeper than a knife. But that night, they did not simply cross a line. They placed me in the middle of a ballroom, turned the lights on, and decided to take the only place where I had finally felt free. Before I tell you how everything began, please subscribe to the channel. Here, I share stories about family secrets, money, betrayal, and those moments when a person finally stops being convenient for people who call control love. My story may sound harsh, but things like this often happen not in dark alleys, but at beautifully decorated tables. My younger sister Lauren's wedding took place in Charleston, at an old estate with white columns, a perfect lawn, and a view of the water. Everything looked so flawless that even the air seemed rented. Tall vases of white roses stood on every table, crystal chandeliers hung over the dance floor, and the musicians played so softly they seemed afraid to disturb someone else's fairy tale. My mother was completely in her element that day. She moved between the guests in a peach-colored dress, touching people on the shoulder, laughing at the right moments, and accepting compliments as if the celebration belonged to her. To outsiders, she had always looked like the perfect mother. Warm, elegant, caring, a little dramatic, but supposedly only because her heart was so big. At home, that same woman could ignore my calls for weeks if I refused to give my brother money. She could call me cold because I would not pay for Lauren's latest mistake. My father usually stayed silent, but his silence was never neutral. He knew how to look at you in a way that made you question whether you even had the right to your own opinion. Lauren was 7 years younger than me. In our family, they called her Sunshine, though most of the time I saw less light than fires everyone else had to put out for her. She quit jobs because of bad energy, took out loans for designer things, and fell in love with men who loved her lifestyle more than they loved her. Whenever the consequences became too expensive, my mother always found a way to make me responsible. My house by the ocean was the first thing nobody had given me with conditions attached. I bought it after 12 years of working at a financial firm in Atlanta. During the first years, I barely had weekends, ate grocery store salads at my desk, and looked at photos of seaside homes as if they belonged to someone else's dream. When I walked into that house for the first time, my knees actually trembled. It was not because of luxury. It was because of the quiet. Inside that house, nobody told me who I had to be. Nobody asked to borrow money, nobody blamed me for not being soft enough, and nobody compared me to Lauren. I could open the window in the morning, hear the ocean, and believe for a few minutes that my life truly belonged to me. The only person who understood that was my grandmother Evelyn. She never played along with my mother's little performances, and she never pretended our family was healthy. When other people called me stubborn, Grandma said I had simply learned to stand upright. When my mother complained that I had become too independent, Grandma answered that independence was not an illness. 3 days before she died, she called me into her bedroom. The doctors were already speaking in low voices in the hallway, and the room smelled of lavender, medicine, and old wooden furniture. Grandma lay beneath a white blanket, looking so small that I was afraid to touch her hand. But her eyes were still clear. She asked me to close the door, then pulled a cream-colored envelope from under her pillow. My name was written on it in her trembling handwriting. I wanted to open it right away, but Grandma squeezed my fingers harder than I expected. "Do not open it until they make you feel ashamed of having your own life," she whispered. At the time, I thought she was speaking through pain. I did not want to believe Grandma saw some danger I was stubbornly ignoring. I kissed her forehead, took the envelope home, and placed it inside the drawer of my nightstand. A few days later, she was gone, and I buried that moment deep inside myself because grief did not leave room for mysteries. A little more than 3 months passed before Lauren's wedding. My mother kept saying the event would heal our family. She asked me to be patient, not ruin my sister's day, not bring up old wounds, and behave like a grown woman. In her vocabulary, that always meant one thing: I was supposed to stay quiet while everyone else took whatever they needed. The first few hours of the wedding were almost peaceful. Lauren looked happy, her groom Michael laughed nervously, and his family from North Carolina acted polite, though slightly superior. I stayed near the edge of the ballroom, smiled at familiar faces, and counted the minutes until I could return to my hotel. After the first dance, my mother took the microphone. She wore the same smile that always made my stomach tighten. That was the smile she used right before saying something cruel in beautiful words. "Today, our family does not only gain a new son," she said, looking out at the guests. "Today, my older daughter Claire shows us that real love is stronger than property." I froze with a glass of champagne in my hand. The guests turned toward me, and someone had already started smiling, as if expecting a sweet surprise. Lauren covered her mouth with one hand, but her eyes did not look surprised. They looked hungry. My mother kept talking about family, sacrifice, and new beginnings. Then she said I had decided to give Lauren and Michael my house by the ocean, so the newlyweds could begin their life in a place made for love. The room exploded in applause, and I felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. My father walked up to me with a dark blue folder. His face was calm, but his eyes ordered me not to argue. He opened the documents directly to the page with my name and the empty space for my signature. The address of my house was already printed there, along with the notary's information and the wedding date, as if this deception had been planned for more than one day. "Just sign it, Claire," he whispered. "Do not embarrass the family in front of everyone." My mouth went dry. I looked at my mother, then at Lauren, then at the guests waiting for the beautiful scene to continue. Nobody saw the trap. Or maybe they did, and chose to clap anyway. "I am not signing anything," I said loudly enough for the first row to hear every word. My mother's lips twitched, but the smile stayed on her face. She stepped closer, lowered the microphone, and hissed quietly enough that the guests could not make out her words. "Grandma always knew how ungrateful you were." At that exact second, the cream-colored envelope flashed through my memory. Her cold fingers, her warning, and her strange calm before death all came back at once. I placed my glass on the edge of a table, turned around, and walked out of the ballroom. Behind me, my mother was already telling the guests that I was simply overwhelmed by emotion. My father called my name, but his voice faded with every step. In the car, I opened my purse to find my keys and saw a message from an unknown number. My hands were shaking when I tapped the screen. The message said, "Claire, if they asked for the house, open Grandma's envelope right now." The message stayed on my screen while the wedding music pulsed behind the estate walls. For a few seconds, I could not move my fingers or breathe properly. Someone knew what my family had just tried to do to me. Someone knew about the envelope before I had even remembered it myself. And somehow, that frightened me almost as much as my mother's announcement. I locked the car doors and sat in the dark parking lot, watching guests move past the windows with champagne glasses in their hands. From outside, the wedding still looked perfect. People were laughing near the fountain, the string lights were glowing over the lawn, and somewhere inside, my sister was probably pretending to be heartbroken over my selfish little outburst. My phone buzzed again before I could start the engine. "Do not go back inside. Drive to your hotel. Call me when you have the envelope." I stared at the unknown number, feeling a slow pressure build behind my ribs. Every instinct told me not to trust another stranger that night. But the wording sounded too precise to ignore. They did not ask whether my family had mentioned the house. They already knew. My hotel was 15 minutes away, but that drive felt much longer. I kept seeing my father's hand around the folder, my mother's polished smile, and Lauren's eyes as she waited for me to give her my life. The worst part was not even the demand itself. It was the confidence. They had not hoped I would sign. They had expected it. When I reached my room, I locked the door, slid the chain into place, and pulled my suitcase onto the bed. The envelope was inside a zipped pocket beneath my black dress shoes. I had packed it without thinking, maybe because some buried part of me remembered Grandma's warning. The paper felt heavier than it should have. My name was written across the front in Grandma Evelyn's shaky handwriting, with a faint line under the letter C. She always did that when she wanted me to pay attention. Inside was not one letter. There were 3 folded pages, a small brass key, and a business card for a law office in downtown Charleston. The card had a handwritten name across the back: Abigail Reese. My hands were still trembling when I unfolded the first page. Grandma's writing was uneven, but every word looked deliberate. Claire, if you are reading this, your mother has finally tried to take the house. I sat down on the edge of the bed so fast the mattress dipped under me. For a moment, I felt like Grandma had reached through death, taken my face in both hands, and forced me to look at something I had refused to see. The letter continued. She has asked me for it twice. Your father has asked once. Lauren believes the house was promised to her because your mother told her I intended to correct my mistake before dying. That was never true. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I had known my mother resented that house, but I had not known she had gone to Grandma about it. She had smiled at me for months, asked about my garden, complimented the kitchen, and all that time she had been trying to move my life under someone else's name. The second page was worse. Grandma wrote that the house had once belonged to a private family trust connected to her side of the family. Years earlier, she had helped me buy it quietly by arranging the final financing through that trust. I had paid every mortgage payment myself, but Grandma had protected part of the purchase so nobody could pressure me into selling it quickly. I had never known that. She had told me it was a favorable bank arrangement, and I had believed her. Maybe she knew I would refuse help if she called it help. Then I reached the line that changed the air in the room. There is a second will because your mother pressured me to sign the first one while I was medicated. I read that sentence 3 times. My eyes moved over the words, but my mind kept rejecting them. A second will meant there had been a first. A pressured will meant my mother had not only planned tonight. She had been working on this since before Grandma died. The brass key fell from my lap onto the carpet. I picked it up and turned it over, noticing a small tag wrapped around it with yellowed string. On the tag, Grandma had written 2 words: desk drawer. I called the unknown number with my thumb hovering over the screen longer than necessary. A woman answered on the second ring. Her voice was calm, low, and steady, like she had been waiting near the phone. Claire, this is Abigail Reese. I was your grandmother's attorney. I closed my eyes because hearing it out loud made everything real. She told me you might call tonight, Abigail said. I am sorry it happened during the wedding. I almost laughed, but nothing came out. You knew they would do this? I knew they would try something public, she said. Your grandmother believed your mother would use shame because private pressure had stopped working. The room suddenly felt too small. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back, looking down at the quiet street below. A carriage rolled past with tourists laughing under a warm Charleston night, while my entire family was probably inside that estate turning me into the villain. What is in the desk drawer? I asked. There was a pause on the other end. Evidence, Abigail said carefully. Enough to stop the transfer, challenge the first will, and expose what your parents did after Evelyn entered hospice. My stomach turned. What did they do? Abigail exhaled slowly, like she hated that I had to hear it from her. Claire, your parents withdrew money from the trust after your grandmother became incapacitated. Some of that money appears to have paid for your sister's wedding. I gripped the curtain so tightly the fabric twisted in my fist. The chandeliers, the flowers, the champagne, the perfect lawn, the beautiful lie of family unity. All of it might have been paid for with money Grandma had hidden to protect me. Before I could answer, loud knocking hit my hotel room door. Then my father's voice came through the wood, low and furious. Claire, open the door. Your mother says you have something that belongs to this family. My father knocked again, harder this time, and the sound moved through the hotel room like a warning. I stood by the window with Grandma's letter in one hand and the brass key in the other, suddenly aware of how thin the door looked. A few minutes earlier, I had felt humiliated and cornered. Now I felt something colder taking shape inside me. I pressed the phone closer to my ear. My father is outside my room. Abigail Reese did not sound surprised. Do not open that door. He sounds angry. Claire, anger is not the problem right now, she said. The problem is that they know you left with something they cannot control. My father hit the door with the side of his fist. Claire, we are not doing this in a hotel hallway, he said. Open the door and stop acting like a child. Those words would have worked on me 5 years earlier. Maybe even 2 years earlier. I would have opened the door, apologized for making everyone uncomfortable, and listened while he explained why my feelings were less important than the family image. I knew that version of myself too well. She had paid debts she never created and swallowed apologies she never owed. But that woman was not standing in that room anymore. I need to go to Grandma's house, I whispered. Abigail's voice lowered. Not alone. Before I could answer, my mother's voice joined my father's outside the door. She sounded breathless, but not frightened. She sounded irritated, like I had embarrassed her at a dinner party and needed to be corrected before dessert. Claire, sweetheart, please open the door, she said. People are asking questions, and you are making this uglier than it needs to be. I almost smiled at that. They had announced the theft of my house in front of 200 people, but somehow I was the one making things ugly. Abigail asked if hotel security was nearby. I told her I did not know. She instructed me to call the front desk from the room phone, keep my cell line open, and say I had unwanted guests refusing to leave. My fingers felt stiff as I picked up the receiver. The young woman at the front desk promised to send someone up right away. Outside, my father lowered his voice. You do not understand what you are doing, he said. Your grandmother was confused near the end. Whatever she gave you is not what you think it is. That sentence made my skin prickle. I had not told him about the envelope. I had not mentioned Grandma's letter, the key, or the attorney. The only way he could know she had given me something was if he had been looking for it. I looked down at the brass key in my palm. It suddenly felt less like a clue and more like a loaded weapon. Did you hear that? I asked Abigail. I did, she said. That is important. My mother's voice sharpened through the door. Claire, your sister is crying in her wedding dress because of you. Is that what you wanted? To ruin the happiest day of her life because you cannot share. There it was. The old hook. Shame wrapped in family language. I had heard it so many times that my body reacted before my mind did. My chest tightened, and for one awful second, I imagined Lauren sitting at the head table, face streaked with tears, guests whispering that I had ruined everything. Then I remembered her eyes on that stage. Dry, bright, waiting. No, I said, though they could not hear me yet. I am done. A security guard arrived less than a minute later. I heard his calm voice in the hallway, followed by my father's polished explanation. He said there had been a family misunderstanding. My mother added that I was overwhelmed, grieving, and not acting like myself. She always knew how to make control sound like concern. I opened the door only after the guard asked me directly if I wanted them removed. My parents stood there in their wedding clothes, both still beautiful enough to fool strangers. My mother's pearl earrings caught the hallway light. My father held the blue folder under one arm, like he still believed paper could make theft respectable. I want them to leave, I said. My mother's face changed for half a second. The sweetness slipped, and something hard looked out from underneath. You will regret this, she whispered. The security guard stepped between us, and my parents had no choice but to walk toward the elevator. Before the doors closed, my father looked at me with a kind of quiet hatred I had never seen before. You have no idea what Evelyn did, he said. That was when I understood something I should have understood years ago. They were not only afraid of what Grandma had left me, they were afraid of what she had taken away from them. Abigail stayed on the phone while I packed. She told me to drive to Grandma's house and meet her there, but only after she contacted a private investigator who had been working quietly for Evelyn during the final months of her life. That part made me stop with my black heels in my hand. A private investigator? I asked. Your grandmother suspected financial abuse, Abigail said. She also suspected your mother had manipulated the first will. I sat on the bed again because my legs suddenly felt weak. How long did she know? Long enough to prepare, Abigail said. not long enough to confront them safely. The drive to Grandma's house took 20 minutes. Charleston looked almost unreal through the windshield, all warm lights, old porches, and quiet streets that seemed too gentle for what was happening. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting my father's car to appear behind me. Grandma's house sat at the end of a narrow street lined with oak trees and hanging moss. I had not been inside since the funeral reception, when my mother stood in the kitchen telling relatives which silver pieces would go to Lauren. At the time, I had been too numb to argue. Now I stood on the porch with Grandma's key in my hand, wondering how much of my life had been divided up while I was still standing in it. Abigail arrived in a gray sedan 5 minutes later. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled back and a leather briefcase tucked under one arm. She did not hug me or waste time on soft phrases. Instead, she looked toward the street, then at me. "Once we open that drawer, there is no going back," she said. "I think they already made sure of that," I answered. Inside, the house smelled exactly as I remembered. Lemon polish, old books, and the faint lavender sachets Grandma kept in every closet. For a moment, grief rose so fast I nearly choked on it. Then Abigail placed a hand gently on my shoulder and guided me toward the study. Grandma's desk stood by the window, its dark wood polished and scratched from decades of use. I knelt, found the lower drawer, and slid the brass key into the lock. It turned with a small click that sounded impossibly loud. Inside were 3 things: a sealed flash drive, a notarized document labeled Second and Final Will of Evelyn Montgomery, and a photograph of my mother standing outside a bank with Lauren, both of them smiling beside my father. On the back of the photo, Grandma had written one sentence: "Ask them why this was taken the day after they told me my accounts were frozen." The photograph made less sense the longer I looked at it. My mother stood outside the bank in her cream blazer, smiling like she had just won something. Lauren was beside her in oversized sunglasses, holding a coffee cup and a designer bag I remembered seeing on her Instagram. My father stood slightly behind them, one hand on my mother's shoulder, his face calm and proud. The date on the back was only 6 weeks before Grandma died. I looked up at Abigail, waiting for her to explain why my grandmother would hide something like that in a locked drawer. Instead, she opened her briefcase, pulled out a slim laptop, and placed it on the desk. "Your grandmother called me the morning after that photo was taken," Abigail said. "She was upset because your mother told her the bank had frozen several accounts due to a paperwork issue." I glanced at the picture again. But they were standing outside the bank. "Yes," Abigail said quietly. "And according to the records Evelyn later obtained, money moved out of those accounts that same afternoon." My stomach tightened with a slow, sick pressure. "How much money?" Abigail inserted the flash drive into her laptop. The screen lit her face in the dim study, making her look older and sharper at the same time. A folder opened, and inside were dozens of files labeled by date. Across several transfers, just over $900,000. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. I heard the old clock ticking near the bookshelves, the wind moving against the windows, and my own breathing becoming uneven. $900,000 was not a mistake. It was not a misunderstanding or a family disagreement. That was a plan. Abigail clicked one file and a scanned bank statement appeared. I saw Grandma's trust name, then 3 outgoing transfers. One went to a wedding vendor. Another went to a luxury event planner in Charleston. The third went to a company I recognized immediately: Lauren's interior designer. I leaned closer, hoping I had misread it. But the name stayed there, clear and cruel. "They used Grandma's money for the wedding," I said. Abigail did not answer right away. Her silence was worse than agreement. The next file showed an invoice for the venue. The deposit had been paid from an account connected to Grandma's trust. Another file showed floral arrangements. Then catering. Then the custom gown fitting in New York. Each document felt like another hand pressing against my chest. The beautiful wedding was not just a performance. It was evidence with candles. Then Abigail opened a video file. My grandmother appeared on the screen, sitting in the very chair beside the study window. She looked fragile, wrapped in a blue cardigan, but her voice was steady enough to cut through the room. "My name is Evelyn Montgomery," she said. "I am recording this because I believe my daughter, Marjorie, has been pressuring me to change my will while I am ill." Hearing her voice nearly broke me. I gripped the edge of the desk and tried not to cry, because I was afraid that once I started, I would miss something important. Grandma continued, explaining that my mother had brought papers to the house several times. My father had stood in the doorway during one visit, saying nothing while my mother told Grandma that Lauren deserved the beach house because Lauren was starting a family properly. Grandma said they wanted me removed from the trust protections because I was selfish with money and too independent to understand family duty. Then she looked directly into the camera. "Claire earned her home. I helped protect it because I knew they would come for it one day." My hands covered my mouth before I realized I had moved. Abigail paused the video. "There is more, but you need to understand the structure first. The first will your mother has been talking about leaves most liquid assets to her, with several family properties directed into a trust she controls. The second will revokes that arrangement." "What does the second will say?" I asked. Abigail slid the notarized document toward me. I read the first page slowly, then the second. The legal language was stiff, but the meaning became clearer with every line. Grandma had not only protected my house. She had redirected control of her remaining estate away from my mother and placed it into a trust managed by Abigail's office. The beneficiaries were listed by name. My name appeared first. Then several charities Grandma had supported quietly. Lauren's name was there too, but with one condition attached to any inheritance. She had to repay misused trust funds or cooperate fully with the investigation. I looked at Abigail, barely able to speak. "Does Lauren know?" "She knows enough to be nervous," Abigail said. "She may not know the full amount." I laughed once, but it came out broken. "This is just crazy." The words sounded small compared to what was happening. My family had not only tried to take my house in front of strangers. They had drained Grandma's accounts, staged a wedding with stolen money, and used the crowd as pressure so I would sign away the one asset they still could not reach. The worst part was how familiar it felt. They had always done this emotionally. They took my time, my guilt, my silence, my holidays, my money, and my peace. Now I was simply seeing the paperwork version of the same disease. Abigail clicked another folder labeled audio. A recording began with muffled voices, then my mother's voice filled the study. "She will fold if we do it publicly. Claire cannot stand being seen as cruel." My father answered, calm as ever. "Make it part of the toast. Once people clap, she will not have the nerve to refuse." Then Lauren's voice came in, softer but unmistakable. "What if she says no?" My mother laughed. "Then we remind her who she is without this family." I stepped back from the desk as if the laptop had burned me. There was no misunderstanding left. No soft corner where I could hide one last excuse for them. My humiliation had been rehearsed. Before I could say anything, headlights swept across the study window. A car stopped outside Grandma's house, close enough for the beams to cut through the curtains. Abigail closed the laptop halfway and looked toward the front door. A second later, my mother's voice rang from the porch. "Claire, open this door. We know you are in there with that lawyer." My mother's voice on the porch sounded nothing like the woman from the wedding stage. There was no warmth left in it, no polished sweetness, no careful southern charm for strangers to admire. She sounded furious, frightened, and entitled all at once. Abigail closed the laptop and removed the flash drive with practiced calm. Then she slipped it into a small case and placed it inside her jacket pocket. "Do not answer emotionally," she said. "They want you unstable." I almost laughed at that, because they had spent my whole life making me unstable, then punishing me for shaking. But this time, I was not alone in a kitchen, or a hallway, or the back seat of my father's car after another family dinner. I was standing in Grandma's study with proof. My father knocked next, 3 hard strikes against the front door. "Claire, this has gone far enough," he called. "You are trespassing in a house that does not belong to you." I looked at Abigail. "Is that true?" "No," she said. "Under the second will, the property is under state review. Your grandmother also gave you written permission to access this study." My mother heard voices inside and raised her own. "That lawyer's using you," she shouted. Your grandmother was confused. She hated being sick, and she said all kinds of things near the end. The cruelty of that sentence moved through me slowly. They had taken Grandma's money, pressured her while she was dying, and now they wanted to steal her mind too. If the truth became inconvenient, they would call it confusion. If a dying woman protected herself, they would call it illness. I walked toward the front hall before Abigail could stop me. The porch light painted my parents in a pale yellow glow. Lauren stood behind them in her wedding dress, the train gathered over one arm to keep it off the steps. Her makeup was still perfect, except for the corners of her mouth, which had tightened into something sharp and ugly. "You brought her?" I asked through the closed door. My mother's eyes flashed. "Your sister has a right to be here." "She has a right to finish her wedding," I said. "Unless the wedding was never the point." Lauren stepped forward. "You humiliated me." I stared at her through the glass. "You stood there waiting for my house." Her face changed for a second, and I saw something beneath the bridal softness. Not guilt. Annoyance. As if I had failed to perform my role and ruined the lighting. "You have no husband," she said. "You have no children. You do not need a house like that." I had heard softer versions of that sentence for years. Usually, it came wrapped in concern. This time, she said it bare. My life was smaller to them because it did not decorate theirs. Abigail moved beside me and spoke through the door. "Marjorie, Richard, Lauren, this conversation is being documented. I strongly advise you to leave the property." My mother laughed, but it came out too high. "You think a little lawyer can scare us?" "No," Abigail said. "The financial records probably can." Silence dropped over the porch. For the first time that night, my father looked less angry than calculating. His gaze moved from Abigail to me, then toward the dark study behind us. "What did Evelyn give you?" he asked. I almost answered, but Abigail touched my wrist lightly. My mother recovered first. She pressed one hand against the glass, her wedding bracelet flashing in the porch light. "Claire, listen to me," she said, suddenly softer. "This family is on the edge of something very ugly. You can still stop it. Give us whatever Evelyn left, sign the house documents, and we will tell everyone tonight was stress and grief." There it was, offered like mercy. My silence in exchange for their forgiveness. My home in exchange for a place at their table. "And if I do not?" I asked. My mother's expression hardened. "Then you will lose more than a house." I felt Abigail straighten beside me. My father stepped closer. "Your grandmother moved money in ways you do not understand. If you drag this into court, people will ask questions about you too." That caught me off guard. "About me?" Lauren smiled then, a small smile full of poison. "You really think Grandma only protected you because she loved you?" The hallway seemed to narrow around me. Abigail turned toward me quickly. "Do not engage with that." But Lauren had already seen the crack open. "She felt guilty," Lauren said. "Ask Mom why." My mother spun toward her. "Lauren, stop talking." That was the first real fear I heard in my mother's voice. Something inside me went still. For years, my family had used half-truths like locked doors. They would mention just enough to make me afraid, then tell me I was dramatic for wanting the key. But Grandma had left me an actual key, and I was done standing outside my own life. "What guilt?" I asked. My father's jaw tightened. My mother looked at Abigail, then at me, as if choosing which lie had the best chance of surviving. Lauren's eyes shone with a cruel kind of triumph. "Tell her," she said. "Tell Claire why Grandma put that house in her name so carefully." My mother slapped Lauren across the face before anyone could move. The sound cracked through the porch and left all of us frozen. Lauren grabbed her cheek, more shocked than hurt. My father cursed under his breath. Abigail immediately reached for her phone. My mother turned back to me, breathing hard, with her perfect peach dress wrinkled under her coat. "You see what you are doing," she said. "You are tearing this family apart." I looked at Lauren's red cheek, then at my mother's shaking hands. For the first time, I realized they were not united by love. They were united by what each of them knew about the others. Abigail began speaking to someone on the phone, giving the address and asking for police assistance. My father heard her and stepped off the porch, suddenly aware that this scene was no longer private. My mother leaned close to the glass one last time. If that envelope told you anything about your father, she whispered, you need to understand Evelyn lied first. Then she backed away before I could answer. A minute later, another car turned onto the street. It was not the police. It was a black SUV with tinted windows, and Abigail's face changed the moment she saw it. Claire, she said quietly, get away from the windows. The SUV stopped in front of Grandma's house, and a man I had never seen before stepped out holding another blue folder. The man from the black SUV did not walk like someone arriving late to a family argument. He moved slowly, carefully, with his eyes sweeping the porch, the windows, and the street behind him. My father recognized him before I did, because his face lost color so quickly it almost scared me. My mother turned toward the driveway and whispered, no. He is not supposed to be here. Abigail stepped away from the window, but she did not look confused anymore. She looked like a woman watching the final piece of a very ugly puzzle slide into place. Who is that? I asked. Daniel Hart, she said. Your grandmother hired him 3 months before she died. The man reached the porch with the blue folder tucked under his arm. He did not look at my parents first. He looked through the glass door directly at me. Claire Montgomery, he asked. I nodded before I could stop myself. My name is Daniel Hart. Evelyn asked me to deliver this only if your parents attempted to force a property transfer. My mother made a sharp sound, somewhere between a laugh and a gasp. That woman was sick. Whatever she told you was nonsense. Daniel turned to her with no expression. Mrs. Montgomery, I have recordings of you saying the opposite when you hired a neurologist to declare her competent for estate revisions. That shut her up. For the first time in my life, I watched my mother run out of words. Her mouth opened slightly, but nothing polished came out. No performance, no wounded tone, no perfect sentence about family loyalty. Just silence. My father stepped forward. This is private family business. Daniel glanced at the folder under my father's arm. So was asking your daughter to sign away a $2 million house during a wedding reception. The porch went completely still. Abigail opened the door only after confirming Daniel was alone. She kept one hand near her phone, and I noticed she had not ended the call for police assistance. Daniel stepped inside, bringing the smell of night air and rain-soaked pavement with him. He handed me the blue folder, but kept his fingers on it for 1 extra second. You should sit down before opening this, he said. I hated that sentence immediately. People always told women to sit down before giving them the kind of truth men had already survived knowing. But my knees were weak anyway, so I walked back into Grandma's study and sat in her chair by the window. The same chair from her video. The same place where she had looked into the camera and protected me when she could barely protect herself. My parents remained in the hallway, blocked by Abigail and Daniel. Lauren stood just inside the front door, one hand still pressed to her cheek. Her wedding dress looked strange in Grandma's old house, like a costume from the wrong scene. I opened the folder. The first page was a copy of my birth certificate. I recognized it instantly because I had needed it when I bought the beach house. My father's name was listed clearly. Richard Montgomery. The second page was another certificate, older looking, with the same hospital name and the same date. But this version had been stamped as amended. My father's name was not on it. The name listed there was Thomas Whitaker. I stared at the page until the letters blurred. Who is Thomas Whitaker? Nobody answered fast enough. My mother moved first, stepping toward the study with both hands raised, as if she could physically stop the past from reaching me. Claire, that paper means nothing, she said. There were mistakes at the hospital. Daniel's voice stayed even. There were no hospital mistakes. There were court filings, a sealed paternity action, and a settlement arranged by Richard Montgomery's father. I looked at my father. The man who had taught me to ride a bike by criticizing my balance. The man who had called me difficult, cold, and selfish for as long as I could remember. He was standing in the doorway, staring at the carpet. You knew, I said. He did not deny it. That hurt more than any answer. Abigail placed another document on the desk. Thomas Whitaker owned the original coastal property through his family trust. He died before he could legally establish paternity, but Evelyn knew. She also knew Richard's family helped bury the claim. My hands tightened around the folder. The beach house was not some random investment Grandma had helped protect. It was connected to the man my mother erased from my life. A man who had apparently tried to claim me, tried to leave something for me, and disappeared behind paperwork before I was old enough to remember his name. My mother's voice softened in the way it always did when she was most dangerous. I did what I had to do, she said. You had a stable home. You had a father. You had a name. I looked at Richard. He still would not meet my eyes. A father? I asked. He tried to steal my house tonight. Lauren let out a bitter laugh from the hallway. So that is why Grandma treated you like royalty. Because everyone felt sorry for poor Claire. I turned toward her slowly. For years, Lauren had believed I was the favored one because Grandma loved me without making me beg. She never understood that love only looked like favoritism inside a family built on punishment. Daniel opened the last section of the folder. There is more. I almost asked him to stop, but I already knew stopping would not save me. It would only give my family another locked room to control. He showed me a bank record from 29 years ago. A trust account had been created in my name after Thomas Whitaker's death. The funds were supposed to support my education and eventually help me buy property connected to his estate. Over time, withdrawals had been made. The signatures on the authorization forms belonged to my mother and Richard. My throat tightened. They stole from me too? Abigail answered gently. That is what Evelyn was trying to document. My mother suddenly snapped. You have no idea what that money cost us. Thomas was going to ruin everything. Everything, I repeated. Or just your marriage? She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the answer before she said anything. Thomas Whitaker had not ruined my life by being absent. My mother had built my absence from him, brick by brick, then made me grateful for the prison. Outside, red and blue lights swept across the walls. The police had arrived. My father finally lifted his head. Claire, think carefully. Once you give them those papers, there is no family left. I stood with the folder against my chest, and for the first time that night, his threat did not land where it used to. Before I could answer, Lauren stepped into the study, pale and shaking. Then tell her about the house fire, she said. Everyone froze. Daniel turned sharply toward her. Abigail whispered my name, and my mother closed her eyes like Lauren had just opened the one door Grandma never had time to lock. Lauren's words stayed in the room like smoke. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The police lights kept sliding across Grandma's walls, red and blue over old books, framed photographs, and the desk where she had tried to leave me the truth. My mother's eyes were closed, my father's jaw had gone tight, and Abigail looked at Daniel like she had just realized even her files were incomplete. I looked at Lauren. What house fire? She swallowed hard, and for once, she did not look smug. Her hand was still pressed to her cheek where my mother had slapped her. Mascara had begun to gather under one eye, making her look less like a bride and more like a frightened child who had wandered into her own lie. Lauren, my mother said carefully, do not say another word. That tone was not a warning. It was a command she had used our whole lives. The kind that told us when to smile, when to lie, when to accept whatever story she needed the world to believe. Lauren glanced toward the police lights outside. No, she said, almost whispering. I am done being the only one punished for knowing things. My father stepped toward her. This is not about punishment. She laughed, but it cracked in the middle. You promised me the beach house because you said Claire only had it because of guilt. You said Grandma owed us after what happened. The room seemed to tilt again. I gripped the folder against my chest. After what happened? Daniel moved closer to the desk and opened his own notes. His expression had changed completely. He was no longer just delivering documents. He was listening like a man hearing the missing motive. Lauren looked at me, then at the floor. When you were 5, she said, there was a fire at the old coastal house. My breath caught before I understood why. I had no memory of that house, only vague flashes from childhood dreams. A hallway filled with orange light. Someone shouting my name. The smell of wet wool. I had always thought those were nightmares stitched from old family stress. My mother shook her head slowly. That was an accident. Lauren turned on her. Then why did you make Dad pay off the caretaker? The silence after that sentence was so complete I heard someone speaking with the officers outside. Abigail stepped into the hall, spoke quietly to them, then returned without taking her eyes off my parents. Daniel's voice was calm. What caretaker? My father rubbed a hand over his mouth. Suddenly, he looked older than I had ever seen him. Not softer, not sorry, just tired from holding up a wall that had finally started to crack. His name was Ellis Grant, he said. My mother snapped her head toward him. Richard. He ignored her. Maybe because the police were outside. Maybe because Daniel had documents. Or maybe because Lauren had finally ruined the one secret that protected them all. The fire started in the guest wing, he said. Claire was asleep in one of the upstairs rooms. Thomas Whitaker was there that night. The name moved through me like a cold blade. My father, I said. Nobody corrected me. Richard looked at the floor again. He came to see you. Evelyn had arranged it because she believed Marjorie could not keep him away forever. My mother's face twisted. He was going to destroy our family. No, I said, my voice shaking. He was going to see his daughter. She stared at me with wet, furious eyes. You were a child. You have no idea what he was. Daniel opened another file on his tablet. Thomas Whitaker died in a house fire on coastal property 29 years ago. The official report listed faulty wiring. Abigail looked at my mother. Evelyn believed that report was incomplete, didn't she? My mother said nothing. Lauren wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. Grandma told me once when she was angry. She said Mom left that night before the fire started. Then she came back after the sirens. A sound left my throat, but it did not feel human. My mother stepped toward me. I did not set that fire. For the first time, she sounded scared. Not offended, not dramatic, not wounded for effect. Scared. Richard looked at her, and something old passed between them. No, he said quietly. But you locked the side gate. My mother went completely still. The officers at the doorway heard that. So did Abigail. So did I. The words did not accuse her of lighting a match, but they opened a darker room than any match could. Thomas had been inside. I had been inside. The gate had been locked. Daniel asked the question before I could. Why? My mother's lips trembled. Because he was not supposed to be there. Because Evelyn promised me she would not bring him near Claire without my permission. Because I wanted him to wait outside until Richard arrived. Richard's face hardened. That is not what you told me. She turned to him with sudden rage. You wanted him gone too. Yes, he said. But I did not want him dead. The sentence landed with a force that made Lauren cover her mouth. My childhood, my missing father, my mother's control, Richard's coldness, Grandma's protection, and the house they tried to steal all collapsed into one terrible shape. This was not about inheritance. It had never been only about money. They wanted the beach house because it was the last piece of Thomas Whitaker they had not managed to erase. Grandma had protected it because she knew it belonged to the part of my life they buried under lies, shame, and locked gates. One officer stepped into the study. Mrs. Montgomery, we need everyone to remain here while we sort this out. My mother turned to me then. Her face softened in a way that once would have destroyed me. Claire, she said. I was your mother. I made mistakes, but I kept you safe. I looked at the woman who had spent my life calling safety whatever kept her comfortable. You did not keep me safe, I said. Grandma did. Her expression broke, but I could not tell whether it was grief or fury. Maybe in her, the two had always been the same. Abigail placed the flash drive, the second will, and Daniel's folder into an evidence sleeve for the officers. Lauren sank into the chair near the wall, her wedding dress spilling around her like a ruined costume. Richard stood by the doorway, silent again, but this time his silence had nowhere to hide. As the officers began asking formal questions, Daniel handed me one final envelope. This was in Evelyn's safe deposit box, he said. She instructed me to give it to you only after you learned about Thomas. My hands felt numb as I turned it over. On the front, Grandma had written one sentence. Claire, this is the part that will hurt, but it will also set you free. I opened Grandma's final envelope while police officers moved quietly through her hallway. My mother sat in the living room with one hand around a glass of water, staring at nothing. Richard stood near the fireplace, speaking to an officer in the careful voice of a man trying to make crime sound like confusion. Lauren had stopped crying, but her wedding dress looked heavier with every minute, as if the truth had soaked into the fabric. Inside the envelope was a letter and one old photograph. The photograph showed a man holding me as a toddler. He had dark hair, tired eyes, and a smile so gentle it made my chest ache before I even understood why. I was sitting on his lap, wearing yellow pajamas, with one hand pressed against his cheek. On the back, Grandma had written his name. Thomas Whitaker and Claire, summer 1989. I touched the picture with one finger. The man had not been a rumor, a mistake, or a threat to a perfect family. He had been real. He had held me. Somewhere in my body, before all the lies, I had known his voice. Grandma's letter began softly. Claire, your father loved you. I am sorry they made you grow up believing love had to beg for permission. I had held myself together through the wedding, the documents, the second will, the stolen trust money, and even the fire. But that sentence opened something in me. I sat in Grandma's chair and cried so hard that Abigail came to stand beside me without saying a word. The letter explained what Grandma had pieced together over the years. Thomas had tried to establish paternity after learning my mother had listed Richard as my father. He did not want scandal, but he wanted visitation, a legal place in my life, and protection for the property his family had intended to leave me. My mother fought him, Richard's family pressured him, and Grandma quietly tried to help him see me. That was why Thomas came to the Coastal House that night. Grandma wrote that she had carried guilt for decades because she arranged the visit. She believed my mother would be angry, but she never imagined anyone would block the gate or delay help. When Thomas died, the official story became faulty wiring, and everyone with power agreed that grieving quietly was better than digging. Except Grandma never truly stopped digging. Over the years, she gathered records, statements, photographs, bank documents, and private notes. She waited until the people around her got careless. Near the end, when my mother began pushing for control of the estate, Grandma finally understood that the past was not buried. It had simply learned to wear pearls and smile at weddings. The final page of her letter was shorter. Do not spend your life trying to earn a place in a family that needed your silence more than your happiness. Keep the house. Keep your name. Keep your peace. And when they call you cruel for leaving, remember that survival often looks rude to people who benefited from your obedience. I folded the letter slowly and held it against my chest. By dawn, the wedding was over in the worst possible way. Not with a last dance, not with sparklers, not with the beautiful send-off my mother had planned. It ended with officers collecting statements, Abigail securing documents, and Daniel handing over copies of evidence that Grandma had prepared with more courage than any of us had understood. My mother was not arrested that night. Real life does not always move that cleanly. But the investigation began, the estate transfer was frozen, and the attempted deed paperwork from the wedding became part of the record. The second will entered probate, and Abigail filed emergency motions to protect the trust assets. Lauren's marriage lasted 11 days. Michael's family withdrew after learning that part of the wedding may have been funded with misused estate money. Lauren called me once, screaming that I had ruined her life. For the first time, I did not explain, defend, or apologize. I simply told her that I hoped one day she would understand the difference between losing a gift and losing what was never hers. Richard sent one email 3 weeks later. He wrote that he had raised me, even if blood said otherwise, and that I owed him respect for that. I read it twice, then archived it without answering. Raising a child while resenting her existence is not fatherhood. It is custody with better manners. My mother tried a different approach. She left voicemails that began with anger, moved into tears, and ended with warnings about how lonely I would be without family. I kept every message for the attorney, but I stopped listening after the first sentence. Her voice had controlled my nervous system for almost 40 years. I was not giving it another room inside me. 2 months later, I returned to the beach house alone. The ocean was gray that morning, and the wind pushed hard against the porch screens. I walked through each room slowly, touching door frames, counters, windowsills, and the old brass handle on the back door. For the first time, the house did not feel like something I had to defend. It felt like something that had been waiting for me to stop apologizing for owning it. In the upstairs hallway, I found a patch of sunlight on the floor and sat there with Thomas's photograph beside me. I did not suddenly feel whole. Stories like mine do not heal because one envelope opens and villains are exposed. Healing came later, in smaller moments. A quiet morning without dread. A blocked phone number. A bank account nobody else could reach. A lawyer who answered questions clearly. A therapist who helped me understand that guilt is not always a conscience. Sometimes it is a leash. I still do not know every detail about the night of the fire. Maybe I never will. Investigations move slowly, memories protect cowards, and some people would rather grow old with lies than spend 1 minute standing naked in the truth. But I know enough. My mother wanted me obedient. Richard wanted me grateful. Lauren wanted me empty-handed. Grandma wanted me free. And in the end, the woman they called difficult was the only one who walked out with the truth.